Earl Thomas situation over there in Baltimore. Now, we all saw in Seattle where he wasn't exactly thrilled to be there towards the end of his career, from the sprinting to the Cowboys locker room, asking him to leave, which they caught on camera perfectly and kind of built the narrative, to the middle finger after getting hurt after not signing an extension with Seattle off the thing. He ends up at Baltimore now. And I thought they had a great relationship. Now, Earl Thomas's offseason was an interesting one, obviously, with the lady and everything like that. It was an interesting one. I mean, it was very, very interesting. But we're in a quarantine world. You know, things can happen like that. Yeah. Now he gets into a scuffle at practice, and they're basically pitching and sending the narrative that conduct detrimental to the team, which they're saying so they can hopefully get back some of the guaranteed money that they owe him in later. But you said something smells fishy here. To me, it does too. It doesn't make any sense because he's a 7-time Pro Bowler, and they said that the senior leadership council on the team wanted him out of there too. Like, what the hell happened over there, and how did it happen so quick?
And also, too, Pat, think about how much information that is public, right? Like, when you start talking about the leadership council, the people that you bring together quietly on your team, right? You've picked these people. You say that these are the leaders of the team. You have meetings individually with themselves, with players alone, with coaches, but those meetings are closed, right? This isn't something that's supposed to get out. Like, you've been on teams when you have stuff that you want to handle in-house and keep in-house, that junk stays in-house. You feel me?
Yeah.
And so now all of a sudden we know about the council wanting him out. And there's been early news out of there that a young Deshaun Elliott's playing well, moving Jimmy Smith around. And when you look at the way Earl fit into that defense last year, he really didn't. Right? Earl's used to playing middle of the field in that Seattle deep cover 3 zone type of system where you have a guy like a Cam Chancellor who's a strong safety. Now you're asking him to play quarters coverage. You're asking him to play half, sometimes be in the box. And those aren't things necessarily that Earl's great at. And so he didn't play at that all-pro level last year. And so now you move into this year, you kind of have the offseason that Earl has, and you have some of those things away from the field. And then now maybe you're not playing as well as some of the young guys, and they start to go, well, shoot, looking at last year, the way it finished, everybody remembers Derrick Henry turning him into a blocker, in the playoffs. Now it's like, how can I get rid of this guy? And Pat, you've been on teams, bro. How many teams can you be a decade-long starter, possibility of being a Hall of Famer, 7-time Pro Bowler, and a young guy who hasn't really accomplished anything in this league? If you saw Earl's post, gets to throw his helmet down and berate you, show you up because he's pissed off that you busted a coverage.
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting because what you just laid out there from the secondary standpoint is something that I might not have recognized or other fans might not have recognized, as Earl doesn't fit in, you think, in the Baltimore scheme. So, for instance, I would assume then, because we've heard David Sampson, who's the former president of the Marlins, and although that's baseball and this is football, I would assume executives operate the same way. He said that they used to float out information about a player if they're about to trade him to the fans, or float out maybe wrong information so that the burden or the anger from the fans isn't as high as it could be. So whenever they started saying, well, I started seeing NFL Network reporters like, he shows up late, he does this. I'm like, oh, this is the team like trying to be like, hey, this is why we're getting rid of the guy. But you're thinking that this all started as he's not as good of a fit for our defense as we thought it was. We owe him some money. Let's try to figure out how we could potentially get him the hell out of here. And by the way, in Earl's side of this thing, Earl might also hate that he wasn't a good fit for that defense either, and maybe know that he's not going to be able to play it to both sides. So it's very interesting, though, to kind of watch the politics behind it all.
Well, Pat, I'm going to tell you this, man. If you remember back when the Antonio Brown thing all started, and I was kind of ahead of it. This is when everybody still loved this smile. Everyone in Pittsburgh.
Oh, yeah, you were a bad guy. I remember that.
I was a bad guy, right?
Yeah.
But it's because I was there every day, and I saw some of these things that we're hearing about with Earl happen. But you know who never heard about it? The media, right? You know where it never got out to? It never got out to the fans. Why? Because he was playing at such a high freaking level that it didn't matter what he did. You were going to keep him. And so I'm not saying that Earl wasn't late to meetings. I'm not saying that he didn't do some things within that building that didn't necessarily make him a favorite. But you know this, if he was playing like Tyrann Mathieu, they wouldn't be getting rid of him. If he was a young Derwin James, they would be getting rid of him. And so I think all those things come into play. But you know, and I know, bro, you've been around some bad dudes that were great players. And as long as they were great players, they had contracts. And so I think
Be who you can afford to be.
yeah, absolutely.
That is an exact quote. Be who you can afford to be. There was a couple coaches that said, like, hey, listen, if Reggie Wayne shows up to a meeting late, guess what? Reggie might not get fined or cut as much as some of you who aren't Reggie Wayne who want to show up late to, like, that's just the way. Yeah, we'll talk to Reggie. Reggie won't show up late, by the way, because Reggie was a consummate professional.
Right.
But if Reggie Wayne does something, you should not be I should be treated the exact same way, because that's not how this game works. And now, granted, there's some buildings that are like, hey, Reggie will get treated the exact same way as everybody else. Now, I'm not saying Reggie ever did anything wrong. That was just the biggest name that I could think of at that time. But I should have said somebody different there for the metaphor. But it's very open. Like, hey, this guy can do some things. You know why? Because this guy is going to get 7,000 yards for us this year. And this guy down here, you know what you're going to do? Probably get us COVID-19 with your beer. The Baltimore Ravens have been framing this as a conduct detrimental to the team, very much so. His personal actions have infringed on the team, like however they've been wording it is basically setting up for a conduct detrimental grievance so that they don't have to pay him his $10 million that he is due next year. Now, he's been released from the Seahawks and the Ravens in the last 16, 17 months, not in a good fashion either. But it's been funny listening to the Ravens obviously leak information that's bad about Earl Thomas so that their fans know, like, hey, this is a guy we want to get rid of, a la what David Sampson told us he would do whenever he's with the Marlins. Oh, this guy's late. He fights this guy. He fights this guy. They're like trying to get everything out there. The leadership council voted him down. They're trying to leak all this information out there so that the fans are like, yeah, we should cut him. We should get rid of him. But this leaves Earl Thomas in a very interesting situation, especially with the offseason that he's had, the Seattle Seahawks departure, and now the Ravens departure. How do you see this whole thing working out?
I mean, everyone assumes that Dallas is going to sign him, don't they? Didn't they free up some space last week with Tyron Smith, and they have room for him, I guess, if they need him. And you would think they're going to give him a shot, but wouldn't you want to really do your homework? I know McCarthy's even been quoted when he was asked about Earl, saying, like, well, obviously we're always in the market for acquiring new talent to our team, but I always want to look at how they're going to fit in the locker room. And now, after all this, that's the question, because the Ravens, you know, Harbaugh's a no-nonsense guy. Like, he runs a pretty tight ship over there, and they seem to have a pretty good culture going. And for whatever reason, Earl's attitude and how he carried himself just didn't seem to vibe with the rest of the team and the coaches. Obviously, it's not just this one fight and this incident that caused it. This was a long time coming. I just wonder, like, if we talk to people within the Ravens, like, was stuff brewing from the beginning? From, like, when the first day Earl got there, has it always been kind of weird and this has just been growing and growing over the time?
The interesting thing is they always talk about being a Raven. You know, and somebody in the YouTube comment section just mentioned that, but that's like one of Harbaugh's thing is like live like a Raven, like be a Raven. And I wonder,
the bird?
Yeah, like the bird. Yeah, quote the Raven evermore. That one as well. And also the wrestler back in the day, Raven. He used to wear jorts. He used to sit on the bottom. He didn't. Don't be that type of. I don't think the Ravens wanted to be that type of Raven. He was kind of like a gypsy who kind of floated around and didn't seem to care a lot.
Rooted a lot.
Yeah, but the Ravens, the Baltimore Ravens, there's a big thing like be a Raven. Like that's how a Raven acts, and I think that is why. Whenever you publicly state about that and talk about that, that's why whenever you start saying that he was late and he's gotten in fights in the leadership council, it's a lot easier pill to swallow for the fans, especially whenever you bring in Earl Thomas. And it's supposed to be this highly big-time signing to bring him in there, 7-time Pro Bowler. But I talked to Ryan Clark earlier this morning, RC, and he's known to be a hater, I guess, is what people say. But a lot of things he says is just dead true, just the way he delivers it. That system was not a fit for Earl Thomas the way he plays. It was a very different style. Last year, I think it reflected that. And I asked him, like, do you think Earl Thomas will be able to get back to form if he was to go to a place that has the same scheme? And he was like, he thinks that the top of the game passed Earl Thomas by, and that just kind of happens to everybody. So now you have to think, who's going to sign him if it's not the Dallas Cowboys? If Mike McCarthy's like, hey, I need a good locker room, and Jerry Jones like, hey, we need good players, that'll be interesting to see who ends up winning in that matchup or whatever. But then what team knows that he would be a good fit there on the field as well, especially after seeing what he did with the Ravens scheme? I mean, this is an interesting thing for Earl Thomas and what's going to end up happening to him.
It's going to be weird wherever he goes because he's going to be plugged into a defense playing with guys that obviously aren't the Legion of Boom like they were back in the day, where those guys kind of came up together. So they all kind of came up together and probably all had a really, really tight relationship from what it seems like. It was very competitive, I know, back and forth with all of them. But he's going to be dumped in. He's the veteran coming into a secondary. And a lot of guys weren't in the league when the Legion of Boom was running, and now he's got to find a way to fit in and play within the scheme. I mean, that's what it seems like a big issue with the Ravens, like playing within the scheme and being accountable to your teammates. And I think the Ravens, whoever leaks all the information out, it makes it a lot easier, I guess, for the Ravens, the front office, when you let everybody know that the players are on board with this too. Like the players aren't out there fighting and saying, this is crazy. I can't believe we cut Earl Thomas, future Hall of Famer probably, and we let this guy go. Like you don't hear any of that coming out of Baltimore right now. Maybe we will. Maybe in the future, maybe the players are scared to death right now. But for the guys that do support Earl, which there definitely will be, I guess they're probably scared of what you can say. You don't want to stand up there and stand up for a guy that just got cut, I guess, for conduct detrimental. So I think we'll know more in the next couple weeks. I mean, Earl seems like he likes telling people his side of the story, so at least we'll get his side.
Even some practice footage leaking.
I mean, you might as well just partner him back up with the Legion of Boom. Sam Fran goes after him. I mean, they have Sherman already. He can get back at Seattle, who we know he hates, and they run cover 3 too, which Ryan Clark was saying he's more of a middle of the field safety, and they have one guy roaming underneath.
If I'm that defense, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're not bringing in anybody that could potentially mess up what we got going on over there in that defense side of the ball, right? I mean, that is because even Sherman even said that. He's like, hey, when he gets back on the grass, he's going to be a problem. Sherman wasn't like, hey, we should try to get him here. Like, if I'm the Niners and I'm that defense, we have something very special right now. Now, I don't know their safety situation. I don't know their roster as good as they should, but I would assume that the Niners defense is like, let's not.
We're good.
Yeah,
don't change the recipe.
Not that you wouldn't. Now, I'm not saying that he would be bad everywhere he goes. Maybe, by the way, there is some situations between Earl that are outliers with the Seattle Seahawks and with the Ravens that are just like one-off beefs, you know what I mean? But if I'm the Niners and that defense did what it did last year, the last thing I'm doing is potentially bringing in a vet to fuck up anything that they got going on.
We all know that fights happen all the time in practice and stuff like that.
All the time.
How often do they happen with two guys on the same side of the ball?
AJ, you would have to answer this more than anything. I'm not fighting Matt Overton, a long snapper. So this seems like this would have to be you. I feel like there's a lot of yelling, bickering that potentially happens, but not anything real, right?
Yeah, usually not real. It comes to the sideline all the time. Like you take your 3 or 4 reps, say the ones take 3 or 4 reps, and you have a disagreement with somebody, or guys in the secondary have a disagreement on a blown coverage. Yeah, that'll come to the sideline. They may get a little heated. It very rarely ever gets into an actual fight. Players will break that up because you don't want defensive guys fighting defensive guys. You don't want offensive guys fighting offensive guys. That's what I was surprised about when I watched this clip that Earl put out at first. I'm like, because I didn't hear anything of who he fought, what was going on. And then I watched the clip and I'm like, wait, he's fighting his other safety? He's fighting his buddy next to him like that? That's pretty rare. Like, I don't know. You have disagreements with guys next to you. Like I said, I'm a linebacker. We may have disagreements on how to fit something or whatever, but man, I can't remember seeing a position group of 2 guys coming together and fighting. It's always like, hey, D-line fighting the O-line, linebackers fighting the fullbacks or running back, things like that.